Hey, let me continue with Dual Citizens. This is tracks 29 to 61. So a good fair whack. It's definitely trucking along, and I think it only goes to like 72. So kind of zooming in on the end there. So Lark, Lark does end up going back to work for W, the filmmaker. I can't remember his name, and indeed actually works for him for like almost like 7 years as his assistant and editor, and becomes sort of a senior thing. He suddenly goes from being very obscure to being kind of mainstreamish. He does this cloning Hello Dolly or Dolly Again, something um, um, uh, documentary, and then it turns into a PBS series, and it kind of spindles from there, and he becomes almost an industry, doing lots of stuff and becoming very kind of educational in a way. And he's super in demand. He's all over the place, and Lark as first is traveling with him, and then decides she wants to be just stay back at their kind of the Pennsylvania thing, and they sort of become a couple. She meets his daughter, who is Minuet, who is very angular, very kind of not but very kind of who she's got this veneer of kind of boarding school kind of class over top of kind of 18-year-old. I don't know if it's anger, but just sharpness. Um, and But in the end, Lark suddenly kind of goes, "Oh, Minuet has kids." After being kind of getting the bird flu, a variation of the bird flu, she gets married very conventionally and ends up having kids, and that just hits Lark like like a hammer, and it's like, oh, it's the kids, and she's not even the one who realizes it. It's others that realize it's the kids. She wants to have kids. She suddenly realizes. Um, Meanwhile, Robin, who was kind of on this track of being kind of piano, virtuoso, as in a gets booked on a kind of a tour through Europe, and then walks away from it. And she walks away from Bernard, who's with her at the time, and learns later that he's kind of wakes up in a drug fog, and it's like, oh, she's left, and he's like actually grateful to her at the end because like, oh, she made me have to try and have to find my way home. She's like, she abandoned you. No, no, she gave me a gift. He's convinced, and it's like, okay. I mean, it was a gift that got him home, and then he ended up in jail twice for selling drugs because it was all he knew how to do. Though that wasn't really Robin's issue. So Robin, she disappears, and that really breaks Lark, um, and really shakes her to the bone. Which is funny. It's another story of where you lose somebody, and they just step out, and it just shakes you, which I can sympathize with. And she but she does reappear again, and she's kind of pissed off at her, very acting kind of like their mother, Marianne. Marianne, who still kind of momentarily kind of shows up to be very indifferent, of like, oh, Robin's disappeared. Well, she went somewhere. Big deal. It's click. Super helpful mother. Um, and But no, she gets back. She does get back. She kind of figures things out, I guess. She ends up moving back to Canada, back to Montreal, and broom broom, uh, um, ends up getting buying a farm with an inheritance from the grandparents, her French Canadian grandparents. She's a half sister of Lark, and there's like she's raising wolves. She's kind of rescuing wolves and stuff like that. It's like a zoo, I think, is what it gets termed as. Um, and she's pouring all her money into that and getting people to donate to that. That's her thing. That's her intense thing. She also has a barn full of rescued pianos, which is kind of hilarious. Lark tells the documentary guy, it's like, I want to have kids. Oh, what are you going to do about that? Because he's not interested. I have a child. And it's like, I don't need another one. Someone criticizes her later. It's like, you don't like to be let anyone in and stuff like that. It's like, well, I was with was it Warlock? Not Warlock, Wheelock for all that time. It's like, yeah, you picked a robot of a guy to be with because that's, and she talks about how he never expressed kind of particular emotions, and she was really good at just kind of picking up on little raised eyebrows or short nods and think, oh, that's praise, that's praise, being dredging all that stuff. But yeah, he's not interested, and she's like, oh. And so she leaves him, and she gets hit by a car, gets a concussion, wakes up in the hospital, and kind of in and out of it. Robin does actually come to her, I think. It's hard to tell. Because she doesn't really have anyone to call. She wouldn't call Marianne. She wouldn't call Wheelock. Um, she doesn't really have anyone. Um, but Robin does show up because they found her name in the phone. She'd been trying to send her a picture of Boris, the piano virtuoso um, teacher, who she had so terribly disappointed, whose wife had left him. They, probably as a booster that way. But yeah, she stays with her until she's sort of feeling she gets better. She's has horrible, vertigo and can't look at a screen for any amount of time, but slowly does get back. And as I called it, ends up editing reality shows because if you got editing skills, that's what you're going to do, and she's good at it. And she's on these shows which are totally. I think one's like ink um, tattoo show, and the other one's like Meat Market, which is like um, people who do they work at a bar? It's either a bar, it's a meat market, or a restaurant where it's young people to meat market. And she's like, she's she's editing all that, but she really wants kids, and she decides to start getting implanted with getting the egg implants, but none of that works. And she's using all her money for that. Robin is using all her money to take care of the wolves. Um, Robin calls up saying, "Hey, I need money for this Catherine," because they're all named after King Henry the Wife's eight's wives. So I guess there'd be a Catherine and a Jane Seymour and all the other Anne Boleyn, all the other wives, um, or Bella, and then she has other ones that are named after poisonous plants like belladonna and all that. But Catherine the Great, Catherine needs needs stuff because she's paralyzed. Her back legs are paralyzed, and so it's like, okay, I'll give you money, but the thing is I need to stay there. It's like, oh, of course you can stay there whenever you want. And so she comes up, and she stays there with them, and she also and they have this whole thing with Catherine, the wolf, which is like really just like, what the fuck's gonna happen with this wolf? And it's sort of at this point that I realize, oh, the prologue of all this is them walking, and suddenly um, is Robin going into premature labor, and we now know who the kid is. At least one of the kid is, because I think it is. They've got. She says, like, I want to have a kid, but it's like she can't have a kid, but I guess using her eggs or something like that to get Robin pregnant. So Robin is now going to carry her child to term, even though Robin's not really, I don't think, really particularly interested in children. I don't know. I guess we'll see how it goes. At the same time in here, Marianne has been getting more and more erratic, more and more basically, probably going senile. And the last thing she does, that's kind of her own volition, is she disappears, and it turns out she's taken a bus to Trois-Rivières, and it's the police are the ones who can't get her because she's inexpertly shoplifting, and so they get her, and it's like they arrive at the police station. Says like, it took you long enough to get here, and it's like, you've always been leaving me. It's like, that's not true. She's very infuriating, but um, says Lark says at the end, it's like, yeah, it's the worst thing is that it took her pride in the end, because the humiliation of losing your brain, um, and the last thing. So it's interesting following these two daughters and the mother through this world, you know, and it's definitely a world without particular male relationships, like long-term ones. Like they're not they're the momentary things, it seems, or they're very ineffective. And yeah, there's all the bird imagery, and then there's the wolves. It's interesting all that stuff in there. I mean, it's Robin and Lark, two birds in a tough world, I guess. I'll have to see how I go, because that's the thing with the literature, is that there is a story, and it's sort of about these two sisters making their way in the world, I guess, or just existing in the world, and the travails and surviving their mother, I guess, and they're going to be surviving their mother because their mother's dying, and their story goes on, which I guess is what happens to all of us. And I guess also just that thing of like, well, how much of this is Marianne's fault? And there's often a reference to the fathers and how they, you know, did Lark pick Wheelock because she wanted somebody who she didn't have to open up to, like, and kind of the betrayal she felt with her own father leaving. I don't know, which is all very kind of pat and reductionist, and maybe these are just very kind of particular. This is how you are in the world. This is your inclination, and also the question of who's the special one. Are they both special? Are neither of them special? Are they just unique human beings? And none of us are special because everybody is special. Yeah. All right, I'm going to leave it there. That was a lot of nattering. And I'll go up and see how my puppies are doing.